I'm Peri, and as of spring 2015, I am the current Vice President of the New Paltz LARP Club. So, in the past few videos, I've discussed more of the serious stuff, etiquette, bleed out, and these are good for encouraging strong relations between the LARPers and the characters, as well as between themselves as well. However, in this video, I'm going to be talking about something else. This video, I want to be talking about character arcs. Many people, when they want to write a story, tend to plan out what their character is going to do, or they wing it. That's basically a very commonly accepted concept. You either make the story in advance, or you come up with it on the spot, and many writers fall into this. Neither is good nor bad. However, writing for a character in a role-playing, a tabletop, a LARP, or something to that extent is very different. They share many similarities, but there's also many things that need to be taken into account. For one thing, there is the fact that you can't predict what's going to happen. So you can't really decide that, well, my character's going to do this, this, and this, and then at this point something traumatizing is going to happen to them, so I'm going to have them change this way, and then this will happen, and this will happen. Even if you write it all in their backstory, chances are someone's going to know a way to change it or alter it in character. And that's important to remember. Also, LARPs and tabletops don't have to have good characters. The most important rule for a character is that you have fun playing them. So an extremely static, shallow, one-note character can actually be a really good idea in a role-playing situation, especially if that's what you want to do. So, with this in mind, let's look at some ways to actually get the most out of your character. The first type of character to play in a LARP situation is a static character. These are best for one-note role-playing situations, one-shots, trying out something for the first time. Usually they're over the top, usually they have one gimmick, maybe they hate trees, maybe they're speaking a silly accent or something like that. I don't know what accent that was. Or something like that. So what you have then is a character that really is never going to change that much. They have their outward appearances and that's it. To play this character, it's actually tougher than it seems because you need to be very charismatic to pull it off in such a way that people's attentions are grabbed. Otherwise what will happen is once people realize what the one note is, they will appreciate it for maybe a session, maybe two, and then start to peter off. So in this sense, static characters actually can be the hardest to play because you have to keep them interesting while still keeping to what was so entertaining about them in the first place. However, if you are not looking to have a character that's that noticeable, a static character can be very good as an introductory way to know the system and have fun. And because they don't change that much, you don't have to worry about the plot affecting you too much if that's what you wanted to go for. The next type of character to consider is the moldable character. These are characters that oftentimes don't really have much going for them at first. These characters will have a backstory. These characters will have traits, likes, hates, strengths, weaknesses, and from that point on, the person will plan nothing else. Now, this is one of the better ways to play a character, but it's not for everyone. And it's also very tough to do, for this very reason, is that if you don't construct your character in a specific way, it's quite possible that your character will turn into something you don't want to play. For instance, if you want to play your character as happy-go-lucky, and they become really good friends with this NPC, and then the NPC gets killed off, suddenly your happy-go-lucky character is very sad, very dour, might not even want to be part of whatever the campaign or the mission's about. So when you make a moldable character, it's very important that you always keep their core in check, or be very willing to play wherever the character goes. For people who want characters to be works of art, or a statement, or an effort on itself, they'll usually have the character change as much as the plot requires, even if it means it's no longer fun for them to play. However, for someone who isn't like that, who just wants to play to have fun, who just wants to explore the world and evolve naturally, it's good to have some rules set in stone. For me personally, what I tend to do is I tend to make my characters very stubborn. What this allows my characters to do is stay in situations that another person might not. So, the premise of a story might be, okay, we're part of this mercenary group. And then your character runs into a situation that they see a bunch of children murdered, and they are horrified by it. And their first reaction might be, oh my god, I don't want to do this anymore. But you, the player, want your characters to stick around so that you can continue playing them for the rest of the story. So, in that situation, it might be good to give them either a reason to stay, always give them a reason, or to make them stubborn enough that even if they want to leave, they will refuse to out of principle. Now, stubbornness is my personal choice, but not everyone wants to make a stubborn character. This is why it might be a good idea to construct a backstory that best complements your character for the longest amount of time possible. Depending on the type of thing, this could be for a few months, this could be for a few years, this could be for 2 weeks. These characters also have the issue of sometimes drastically changing, especially when new information comes out. So, you have your character and they're a warrior and you're doing your warrior thing, and then a new magic tree comes out or a new system of something comes out and you're like, I want that! And then you give it to your character because your character's in a much larger state of flux. As a result of this, it can often mean that your build will end very scattered and maybe not as well thought out as you'd want it to be. However, that is a personal choice and up to the player, and not every build has to be min-maxed to the extreme. Moldable characters are also a good idea because it means that they can evolve more organically. So, if they will react realistically to the trauma, they will react realistically to the highs, whereas someone who might not want their character to go a certain way will curb their character. However, there are downsides to the moldable character. It means that every little thing can often send them in a strange direction. It often means they might not have an overarching goal, they might not have an overarching theme, and for people who want characters to be endearing, it can be a bit tougher to do. It can be a bit tougher to pull off a moldable character into something that is a strong line, like engaging story tale. Now, this might not be an issue for some people. For me, personally, it is. So, depending on the type of character you want, it's something to keep in mind. It's also the issue of, if you decide at the very end of your character's lifespan, be it age-wise, be it level-wise, that you want something and you finally realize it then, you might not have enough time to do it. A lot of LARPs and tabletops assume that if you want to, become a god or become ruler, that you better have the justification and the backstory to back it up. And so for a moldable character, this is much harder to do because there was never any planning involved. This is also why the ending might not be what you wanted, even if it had every single aspect leading up to it be perfectly fine. So, honestly, the best thing you can do with moldable characters, at least in my opinion, is always know what you want to do with them and keep everything else in a state of flux. People who tend to make these characters tend to realize that pretty early, but I've noticed that with newbies especially, they might not realize exactly how much leeway they're given, where just because you might say, oh, well, my character wouldn't do this, I guess I have to leave forever now. There is a certain element of, instead of making your character go away forever or dying, think of a reason why your character might stay. Think of a reason why your character might do something unexpected. Make your character more interesting by adding something that you didn't even know was there. Alternatively, you might decide that they would leave, and then you bring in an alt, you bring in a different character. These can also be really well roleplayed and really well acted out and really well written. However, if you're going to do that, you have to keep in mind that things like this will probably happen often, and it's a good idea to write characters with the setting in mind. Writing someone who's very scared and very timid is not going to do well in the long term for a story that has a lot of scary things, unless it's someone who's willing to stick with the story for as long as possible. So, for multiple characters, you have to do what you want, but at the same time, you have to keep in mind what the setting is going to be demanding of you, and especially for newbies, it's much better idea to keep your character in a state of flux until you know exactly what you want to do with them. So then you have the arcing character, and this is where I tend to stand when it comes to role-playing characters. Arcing characters often have a base, an endpoint, and specific points in the middle, with everything else being gray area. What this allows is for a satisfying ending that was foreshadowed, appropriately built up, had appropriate emotional moments, and still has a lot of leeway in the middle for other adventures, other developments. However, this can also be harder to do. It means you have to make some plans set in motion much early on, and it can also end up contradicting with the story. If you have a character who's supposed to become king of a nation, and then the plot decides to destroy that nation, well, you're kind of out of luck. If you want to be the first person to do something, and have that be their big boon, or their big, crowning achievement, and someone does it before you, you are going to be out of luck. There are many ways that this can go extremely wrong. And the best way to take care of that is to either make sure that plot or whoever's in charge knows what you want to do as soon as possible, so that you know that it's possible, and that they know what you want to do, so they'll hold off on other people, stealing your thunder too early on. And it's also a good idea to never set anything so concrete that the slightest contradiction will just break it. A good example of this is, say you want a character to eventually go to, find a lost city and discover some sort of ancient sword. But you don't know where it is, or maybe you set it somewhere where it is, and then it turns out that area is later being used by someone else. In this case, it might be a good idea to keep the references to it vague, but in the general area, so that if someone contradicts it, you can give some leeway, or retconning, even if that's needed. Also, my personal favorite is that characters can be wrong, characters can contradict themselves, characters can be mistaken. The NPCs can be mistaken, so it might turn out that they were wrong for some reason. It might turn out that their map that led them to this island was drawn backwards or drawn by a blind person. There are many ways to make it so that your set-in-stone story can be changed to better fit the plot. The other issue with arcing characters is that they're often done because they sound cool. They are done for the end result, and unfortunately, LARPing and role-playing is never for the end result. It is for the journey. So what will happen is people will make these cool characters with these cool ideas and these cool backstories, but everything else in the middle is just kind of blah, and then you don't like playing them. They become exhausting. They have just a specific style that grates you. Maybe they're not that interesting. Maybe they're too quiet. Maybe they're too stoic. Maybe their philosophy just doesn't gel well with anyone. And you end up devoted to a character that you don't actually like solely because you know that you're going to really enjoy the ending. In these situations, I highly recommend that you either change your character or in terms of their personality, or take a break from them, because honestly, the ending is usually not worth it, because usually something else is going to come along, and if you're not invested in the character, why would anyone else be? If you don't care what happens until they reach the last point, why is anyone else going to be really interested in your character's resolution? Why is anyone else going to care about their backstory if you don't care? This is also an issue when people come up with very, sad backstories, and everyone has a sad backstory, and then, you have to fight to make it the best sad backstory so people can understand it and, feel bad about you. But I've covered that before, so I'm not going to touch upon that too much. The main point of an arcing character is that it's a very good idea to have certain bullet points that you can use so that you have reference points. However, at the end of the day, a LARP and a tabletop is still in flux and should still be able to be molded around problems that show up. The final character is one you should never use, ever. And this is a blueprints character, at least I call it, which basically means the blueprints are right here, and you must follow it to the letter. Those don't work, as I've mentioned, so if you have a very specific arc in mind, you should either be really, really good at the system, know how everything's going to turn out, which probably means you're the GM. In which case, I really hope you're good at making characters by this point, or are trying, and this video is merely a supplementary thing. Or you are psychic, I guess. The point is that never have a character so strict in their lines that you can't get out of your way to change them at all. It just won't work. It won't give them any depth. Now, if you want to take this as a challenge and have a character set in a very specific line, go for it. It's just let it know that's what it's going to be. A challenge, not an easily accessible character that an average person can play and have it be endearing and interesting and fun. So, you have all these characters, and you have to decide which one you want to do. And a lot of it will depend on your personal writing style. Most people will start with a static character, and then they'll go moldable because they realize that their character has changed, and then they'll finally think of an endpoint they want. So it's not like one person is pure one or pure the other. They'll usually think of something to do. Now, you have your character, you've decided maybe a point here and there, or you've decided you're not going to pick a point because you want to explore the world as it is. That's great. So how do you actually develop your character? When are you going to extreme? If someone sees a puppy die in front of them, is that enough to make them go dark and evil? Most people would say no. When do they become, hardened? When do they become traumatized? When is them being mean too mean? When is them being flawed, too flawed, that it's not interesting for people? When are they too nice? When are they actually that perfect balance of complex and layered? Well, this is where you need to start deciding things on your own. The first thing to keep in mind is that there will always be two layers, you and the character. And at the end of the day, if you can't portray it right, no one is going to read it right. If you can't portray the overbearing, like, domineering, tall, like, soldier man, you're probably not going to have anyone realize that's what you're supposed to be. Now, this might limit you, yes, but it also means it could be something to try. Go out of your comfort zone, but keep in mind that the tougher you have depicting something, the tougher it is that people are going to believe it, which means the more work you have to put in. So if you're looking to have a fun and easy character, go with something that you find fun and easy to do. If you are normally goofy, be a goofy character. If you're normally quiet, maybe be a quiet character until you get more confidence. Now, in terms of just flat-out development, the first thing to keep in mind is that LARPs don't exist on the same way reality does. We, in reality, will talk to people, talk about ourselves, and just go about our day. We'll have many acquaintances and many situations, and it's kind of a blur. No one knows who that guy at the subway was. No one really cares. So, LARP is a bit different. Same thing with tabletops. You go to a tabletop, you see the NPC, you talk to them. They must be important. What's your life story, traveler? Oh, what do you mean there was a magical cup in your backstory? We should go find it. That doesn't happen in real life. But it does happen in fiction. It happens in LARPs, and that's an acceptable break from reality. It would be really boring if there were 50 people to talk to, and every single one of them just told you about how their cats were, and it wasn't fun, it wasn't funny, and there was nothing to it. Some LARPs and some tabletops will mess with that and have 5 or 6 people to interact with, but at the end of the day, it's usually a quirk fest. There's usually people there who will be entertaining or interesting, and there's usually some sort of understood balance going on. It's not going to be 50 Joe Schmoes who act the same. There will probably be 50 people who act very differently, and probably different races depending on the genre you have. So, what does that mean for your character? Well, it means you should probably not be very trigger happy with your changes as a character. Because you're going to see a lot of different people and a lot of different things. And if you were to change based on every single thing, you will probably be very exhausted by the time is through, just because of how much stuff is going to be swirling around you. So even if you personally would be horrified if you met a slightly rude person on the street, or horrified because there were 2 fights in a day, LARPs are way more high intense than that. So it's a good idea to keep your character with some sort of, strength to them. Now, I've said that before, be a stubborn character, but there is another reason for it. Because it means you'll also be consistent. Now, if you're consistent, it means that people are going to know what to expect from you. And if they know what to expect from you, they're more likely to, treat you the way you expect to be treated. If you are often mean, but often nice at the same time, you're probably going to have a lot of people who are very hot and very cold to you. And people might treat you very differently, and very contradictingly. And that is something to keep in mind, is that if you are not consistent in how you act, people are going to be inconsistent in how they treat you. Which, that's fine. Be an inconsistent character. Inconsistent characters are great. But it can also mean that you will have a tougher time doing things and have a tougher time getting across what your character is doing. If your character has a sudden great change, it can be very hard to convey that to the players so that they understand that you're a different person. And in that sense, you kind of have to, be a bit more patient than you would in real life. You have to understand that people aren't always going to notice it just because they are trying to act themselves. They are trying to portray their characters themselves. They are trying to keep numbers in their head themselves. They're not going to be paying as much attention as they might if this was a real-life situation where a close friend of theirs has suddenly done a 180-degree change in personality. Now, that's not to say everyone does that, but sometimes in LARP you have to keep in mind that your subtle differences might mean a huge difference. And sometimes your subtle differences will make no difference at all. Now, this is largely about character development. And with these two aspects in mind, the fact that there are many different ways to write a character, And there are a few things to keep in mind when selling your character as a character. How does this all come together? Well, at the end of the day, it's up to you. I can't tell you how to write a good character. I can give you guidelines. I can tell you what worked. I can tell you what didn't work. But I can't tell you that what you're going to be doing is inherently right or wrong. What you have to keep in mind is that what you say in character and out of character is going to affect your character. If you keep saying, my character, doesn't like you, this character, out of character, even if they never find out in character, they'll know. And that will affect how they react. Sometimes that's good. It'll mean they might act more happy and more nice to you because they know you don't like them in character. And it'll be funny and everyone will enjoy it. Or they might avoid you more. And they might distance themselves from you because they know your character doesn't like their character. And that's not them intentionally metagaming. That's not them intentionally wanting to stay away from you. It's the fact of they know it, it's in their subconscious, and they're going to react on it whether they like it or not. So, with that in mind, it's also important to consider the fact that there are 50 million ways to do a character. There are 50 million ways to do character development, and the best way to do it is to do it the way you find it the most interesting. You have the most fun. If you would have your character want to do nothing the entire time, just sit in the corner and watch everyone else, that's fine. That is perfectly fine. There is no wrong way to do that. But if you want an end result, if you want a very specific end result, or if you want a very specific reaction, it is very important to consider what you put into it. So really, whatever character arc you pick, whether you're completely static or moldable or have anything planned at all, there are two important things you just need to consider in the end of this. What do you want out of this character? And how do you plan on getting it? If you write those two things down and see if it works, then that is half the battle won for you. It's that simple. There is no great secret to how character development works. It's a case of what you want to do and how you do it. And if it's not working, reconsider either what you want or how you're doing it. That's that. Character's kind of simple. It's just hard to do, actually. Well, if you have any thoughts on this, you can always contact me through the YouTube channel. Or if you know me in person, you can contact me in person. And if you yourself are confused, look up specifically what type of character you want to do. Look up specifically if you want to play the dark, brooding type, or the hyperactive, wild child. And talk to people who've played those archetypes. Talk to people who've played that type of person. Talk to people who have thrown coups before if you want to throw a coup. Talk to people who have summoned demons before if you want to summon a demon. Talk to people who were mute the entire time. Talk to people who did what you want to do and learn from them. And keep learning, never stop. Happy LARPing.